The room was decorated perfectly, just the way I had envisioned it. Ivory silk draped over the round tables, golden chandeliers casting a warm glow, the scent of fresh roses filling the air. The stage was set, the musicians were in place, and the staff moved quickly, preparing for what was supposed to be the best day of my life. But none of it mattered now, because my engagement party was over before it even began. Not because of a mistake, not because of a disaster, because my parents had planned it this way. They had waited until the last possible moment to strike, ensuring there was no way for me to fight back. 1 hour before the guests were supposed to arrive, my mother had walked into my room, her face unreadable, her hands folded in front of her designer dress. "It's done," she had said simply. "The engagement is canceled." I had stared at her, waiting for some kind of explanation, something that would make sense. But all she did was take my phone from my vanity and show me a message they had sent to everyone. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, the engagement celebration has been called off. Apologies for the inconvenience." Unforeseen circumstances? They had planned this. I had felt my chest tighten, my vision blur as I turned to my mother, my voice barely above a whisper. "You did this?" She had met my eyes without an ounce of remorse. "Your father and I agreed. This is what's best for you." Best for me? Destroying my happiness? Humiliating me in front of everyone? This was best for me? I had gritted my teeth, trying to hold back the rage bubbling inside me. "You had no right." Her expression didn't change, as if she had expected my anger, as if it meant nothing to her. "We had every right. You're our daughter. You don't know what's best for you, but we do." I had taken a deep breath, my hands trembling as I forced myself to stay calm. "You think Aaron isn't good enough." Her lips pursed slightly, like she was annoyed that I even said his name. "He isn't. We've told you this before, but you refuse to listen. He comes from nothing. He has no status, no family name, no future." I had laughed bitterly. "He has me. We love each other. That's enough." My mother had sighed, almost like she pitied me. "That's not how the real world works. Love is enough, dear. You'll understand that soon." I had clenched my fists. "Does Dad know about this?" Her eyes had glinted with something cold. "He's the one who sent the message." That was when the pain had hit me the hardest, because I had expected this from my mother. But from him? I had turned and stormed out of my room, my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I ran downstairs, desperately searching for my father. I had found him in his study, calmly sipping his whiskey, going through some documents like it was just another day, like he hadn't just shattered my future. I had slammed the door shut behind me, my voice trembling with fury. "How could you do this?" He had barely looked up from his papers. "Lower your voice, Amelia." I had shaken my head, stepping closer. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You didn't even have the decency to tell me before canceling." "Because you wouldn't have agreed," he had interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. His stare had been unreadable, but his tone had been final. "You're my daughter. You carry this family's name. Do you really think I'd allow you to marry a nobody?" I had swallowed the lump in my throat. He's not a nobody to me. My father had sighed, setting down his glass. "Amelia, one day you'll understand. Marriage isn't about love, it's about strategy, power, connections. You had a good match lined up before you met him. A real match." I had felt my breath hitch. "Wait. What are you saying?" His silence had been my answer. My voice had dropped to a whisper. "You already arranged something, didn't you?" My father had leaned back in his chair, looking at me like I was a stubborn child refusing to see reason. Aaron was never meant to be your husband. You will marry someone suitable, someone worthy of this family's name. I had felt my chest tighten, my world spinning. They weren't just stopping my engagement. They were replacing it. Like my love, my choice, my happiness. None of it had ever mattered. My father had turned his attention back to his papers, dismissing me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. You'll thank us one day. I had stared at him for a long moment, my hands shaking, my body numb. Then, without another word, I had walked out, not just out of his study, out of the house. The present felt like a blur as I stood in the grand banquet hall, the weight of my family's betrayal pressing down on me. The guests had already started arriving, expecting an engagement party. But instead, they found only whispers and confusion. I could hear them murmuring, some pretending to be sympathetic, while others clearly enjoyed the drama. She must be devastated. I knew this would happen. She was always too stubborn. What a disgrace for the family. I barely heard them. All I could focus on was the two people responsible for this. My parents stood across the room, completely at ease, as if nothing had happened. My mother was talking to one of her friends, laughing softly. My father was in a quiet conversation with an investor. They weren't even looking at me. They had destroyed my happiness, and they didn't even care. They thought this was over, that I would break down, accept their choice, obey. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't a weak little girl anymore. I wasn't someone they could control. They thought they had won. But this was just the beginning. Because I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to burn their world to the ground. And when I was done, they would regret ever thinking they could control me. I didn't leave the engagement venue right away. No, that would have been too easy, too expected. My parents wanted me to disappear, to lock myself in my room like a heartbroken little girl while they smoothed things over with the guests, pretending nothing had happened. So, I stayed. I watched them, observed them. How my mother smiled politely, acting as if she wasn't the reason my world had just crumbled. How my father carried himself with quiet authority, making sure no one dared to question his decision. They thought they had won. That I had lost. But they were wrong. I adjusted the delicate bracelet on my wrist, letting my fingers brush over the charm Aaron had given me on our first anniversary. It was a simple thing, nothing extravagant. Just a silver pendant with our initials carved inside. But to me, it meant everything. My parents could take away my engagement party. They could humiliate me, rip apart everything I had planned, and try to control my future. But they couldn't erase what Aaron and I had. They couldn't change the fact that I loved him. And they were about to learn what happens when they take everything from someone who has nothing left to lose. I turned away from the guests and walked toward the entrance, my heels clicking against the polished marble floors. I felt the weight of their stares on my back, the murmurs growing louder. Where is she going? Is she leaving already? She must be embarrassed. Let them talk. Let them think they understood me. Because soon, they'd realize they didn't know me at all. As I stepped out of the banquet hall, a familiar voice called my name. Amelia. I stopped. My chest tightened. Aaron. I turned slowly, my heart pounding as I met his gaze. He looked exactly how I felt, betrayed, angry, devastated. His usually kind brown eyes were clouded with disbelief, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His suit was slightly disheveled, like he had rushed to get here. Because he did. I already knew The second he received the cancellation message, he must have driven here, desperate for answers. My parents had planned everything so perfectly, but there was one thing they hadn't accounted for. Aaron wasn't like them. He didn't give up on me just because things got difficult. And neither did I. I took a shaky breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. I didn't cancel it. He exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. I know. There was something about the way he said it, so certain, so unwavering, that made my chest ache. Of course he knew me. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. Tell me the truth. Was it them? I swallowed hard, looking away. It wasn't just that they had canceled the engagement. It was the way they had done it. The humiliation, the cruelty, the complete erasure of my choice. I didn't want Aaron to see me like this. Helpless. Because I wasn't. Not anymore. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze again. They don't think you're good enough. His expression didn't change, but something dark flickered in his eyes. I reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. But I do. For the first time that night, his shoulders relaxed slightly. He squeezed my hand back, grounding me. Then they don't get to decide. His words sent a spark of defiance through me. Number. They didn't get to decide. They had spent my entire life dictating my choices, where I studied, what I wore, who I associated with. They had molded me into the perfect daughter, the one who never strayed from their carefully laid out path. But this was where I drew the line. I chose Aaron, and I wasn't going to let them take that from me. A sudden thought crossed my mind, making my pulse race. Marry me. Aaron froze. His lips parted slightly, his brows furrowing. What? I squeezed his hand tighter, desperation lacing my words. Let's get married, now tonight. His breath hitched, shock flickering across his face. Amelia, are you... I'm serious. My voice was stronger now, more certain. They want to control me? They want to dictate my life? Fine. But they can't stop me if I'm already your wife. Aaron stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, his lips curved into the smallest, most dangerous smile I'd ever seen on him. He wasn't just agreeing. He was ready to fight for me. He cupped my face gently, his thumb brushing over my cheek. Are you sure? I nodded without hesitation. More than I've ever been about anything. A car door slammed nearby, breaking the moment. I turned my head sharply, only to see my mother stepping out of her sleek black car. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, locked onto mine. She knew. She had seen me with Aaron, and she was furious. She smoothed down the folds of her dress as she approached, her heels clicking against the pavement. What do you think you're doing? I tilted my head slightly, my lips curving into a taunting smile. Having a conversation. Her jaw tightened. Come home. Now. Aaron's grip on my hand tightened, but he didn't say anything. He didn't have to. This was my fight. I took a slow step forward, meeting my mother's gaze head on. You don't control me anymore. A flicker of irritation crossed her features. You're acting like a child, Amelia. Running away with some nobody? Do you really think that will hurt us? I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. You don't even realize what's happening, do you? Her lips parted slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes. I stepped back, my smile widening. You think you're stopping me from making a mistake? I let out a soft laugh. No, Mother. You just forced me to make the best decision of my life. She opened her mouth to respond, but I was already turning away, already walking toward Aaron's car, already choosing my own fate. And as I slid into the passenger seat, Watching my mother's expression twist into something unreadable, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. Because for the first time, the game was in my hands, and they had no idea what was coming next. The city lights blurred past as Aaron drove, his grip firm on the steering wheel, his jaw tense. Neither of us spoke at first. I could feel the weight of what we had just done pressing against my chest. The way I had walked away from my mother, defiant, unyielding. The way I had chosen Aaron, not just in words, but in action. We were really doing this. We were going to get married. I stole a glance at him. His brown eyes were locked on the road, his mind clearly racing. But I knew him too well. I could see the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped against the wheel. He was thinking, planning. Finally, he spoke. "You really want to do this?" There was no hesitation in my voice. "Yes." His lips parted slightly, like he wasn't expecting my answer to be so firm. Good. Because I wasn't the girl they had raised anymore. I wasn't the puppet they could control. I was choosing my own path. Aaron exhaled slowly, his grip on the wheel relaxing just a fraction. "Okay," he said, nodding. "We'll do it." Something warm settled in my chest. He wasn't just going along with it because I was upset. He wanted this too. But then, his voice lowered. "You know they won't let this slide, right?" I swallowed hard. I knew. My parents weren't the type to just accept defeat. They were powerful, wealthy, and ruthless. And I had just embarrassed them in front of their entire social circle. The golden daughter had walked away, had chosen a man they didn't approve of, had defied them in the most public way possible. There would be consequences. I looked out the window, the reality of it sinking in. "I don't care," I murmured. Aaron glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Yes, you do." I let out a slow breath. "I care about us more." For the first time since we left the venue, a small smile ghosted across his lips. He reached over, took my hand in his, and squeezed. "I love you," he said quietly. I felt my throat tighten. "I love you too." And that was all that mattered. We pulled up to a courthouse downtown. It wasn't exactly the wedding I had imagined. No grand ballroom, no flowers, no music. But I wasn't sad, because this was real. Aaron parked the car and turned to me. "Are you sure you want to do it this way? We could wait. Plan something small but special." I shook my head. "I don't want to wait. I don't want to give them time to interfere." Because they would. I already knew. If my mother hadn't called my father yet, she would soon. And then the full force of their influence would come crashing down. We had one chance to be free before they tried to rip us apart. Aaron studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's do it." We stepped out of the car and walked toward the building, our fingers intertwined. The clerk barely looked up as we entered. "Marriage license?" Aaron pulled out his ID. "Yes." She slid a form across the counter. "Fill this out." I took the pen with slightly trembling fingers. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what we were doing. Aaron glanced at me, his voice low. "Last chance." I met his eyes. "I'm not changing my mind." His lips twitched. "Didn't think so." We signed the forms. The clerk checked them over, stamped them, then nodded toward a judge's office. "Go down the hall. Room 204. Aaron laced his fingers through mine as we walked. His grip was warm, steady. I exhaled slowly. We were really doing this. In a few minutes, I'd be his wife. The judge was an older man, his glasses perched low on his nose as he glanced up at us. "You want a civil marriage?" "Yes," Aaron said. The judge nodded, flipping through some paperwork. You have witnesses? My stomach dropped. We needed witnesses? I opened my mouth, but Aaron beat me to it. We'll find some. I frowned. Who? But before I could ask, he turned toward the door and waved at two people sitting outside. An older couple who looked like they were waiting for something. Excuse me, Aaron said. Would you mind being our witnesses? We're getting married. The woman's eyes widened. Oh, how romantic. She nudged her husband. Stan, get up. We're witnessing a wedding. The man grumbled but stood. All right, all right. Aaron turned back to me, his lips twitching. Problem solved. I stared at him, then let out a soft laugh. Of course. This was why I loved him, because he made everything feel possible. The ceremony was short, simple. But when the judge finally said, "You may kiss the bride," and Aaron's lips met mine, I knew. I had made the right choice. This was where I belonged. We signed the papers. The witnesses signed. And just like that, we were married. We stepped out of the courthouse, the city air crisp against my skin. I turned to Aaron, my husband, my heart racing. We did it, he grinned. Yeah, we did. I let out a slow breath, my mind whirling. So what now? Aaron's hand slipped around my waist, pulling me close. Now? We start our life together, and just for a moment it felt like we had won, like we had escaped, like we were free. But as we reached the car, my phone buzzed. I hesitated. Something cold slithered down my spine. Aaron noticed my hesitation. Who is it? I turned the phone toward him. My stomach twisted. It was a private number, but I already knew. It was them. Aaron exhaled sharply. They know. Of course they did. I swallowed hard and answered. I didn't say anything. For a moment there was just silence. Then my father's voice, cold and sharp. Congratulations, Amelia. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. I clenched my fist, my heart hammering. Number I made the first choice of my life. A long pause. Then a slow, chilling laugh. Oh, sweetheart, he murmured. You have no idea what you've just done. The call disconnected. My fingers tightened around the phone. Aaron placed a hand on my shoulder. What did he say? I exhaled shakily. They're going to fight back. Aaron's jaw tensed. Then we fight harder. I looked up at him, and I knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. Aaron drove in silence, his fingers tight around the steering wheel. The streetlights flickered past, casting shadows across his face. I stared at my phone, my father's words still ringing in my ears. You have no idea what you've just done. I did know. I knew exactly what I had done. I had defied them, and now they were going to strike back. Aaron's voice broke through my thoughts. We should leave the city. I turned to him. What? He kept his eyes on the road. At least for a little while. Just until we figure out what they're planning. Leave? The idea sent a wave of panic through me. My whole life had been here. My job, my friends. But then I thought about my father's voice. The quiet, calculated threat hidden beneath his words. This wasn't just about disapproval anymore. They were going to do something. I clenched my fists. Where would we go? Aaron exhaled. I have a friend in Chicago. We could stay with him for a while. Chicago. Far enough that my parents wouldn't be able to reach me immediately. Close enough that they'd still try. I hesitated. Would leaving mean I was running away? Or was it the smart thing to do? Aaron glanced at me. We can stay. Fight them if you want. But I know your father, Amelia. He doesn't just let things go. He was right. My father didn't fight in public. He fought in the shadows. If we stayed, he wouldn't just make things difficult. He would try to ruin us. I took a shaky breath. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's go." Aaron nodded, turning onto the highway. We were leaving behind the city I had always known, leaving behind the war my parents were about to wage. But I had a feeling they weren't going to let me go that easily. We reached Aaron's apartment just before midnight. It wasn't much, just a small, one-bedroom place on the quieter side of town. But to me, it felt like freedom. Aaron locked the door behind us. "Pack a bag. We'll leave in the morning." I nodded, heading to the closet. I didn't have much here, just a few spare clothes I had left at his place over time. I grabbed a duffel bag, stuffing in whatever I could find. Aaron was in the kitchen, pulling out his laptop. His fingers flew over the keyboard, searching for flights, train schedules, anything that could get us out fast. The tension in the air was thick. Neither of us said it, but we both knew. We were running out of time. Then, a loud knock at the door. I froze. Aaron's head snapped up. Another knock. Harder this time. I swallowed hard. "Who?" Aaron held up a hand, silencing me. He moved toward the door carefully, peeking through the peephole. His body stiffened. I saw it in his eyes. He knew who it was. I took a step back, my heart pounding. "Aaron?" His voice was low. "It's your brother." I felt the blood drain from my face. Ethan. Of course. If my father wanted to reach me, he wouldn't come himself. He would send Ethan. The knock came again. "Amelia, I know you're in there." I clenched my fists. Ethan had always been the one who did the dirty work for my parents. He was their perfect, obedient son. And now, they had sent him to bring me back. Aaron turned to me, his jaw tense. "Do you want to let him in?" I hesitated. Did I? Part of me wanted to just ignore him. Let him stand outside and waste his time. But another part of me, I needed to know what he was here for. I nodded. Aaron unlocked the door and pulled it open just a crack. Ethan stood there in a crisp black suit, his expression unreadable. But I knew him. I could see the anger simmering just beneath the surface. He didn't look at Aaron. His eyes were on me. "Amelia," he said smoothly, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms. "There's nothing to talk about." His jaw tightened. "Come on. You know you can't just walk away like this." I let out a cold laugh. "Watch me." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Dad wants you home." I stiffened. Home. Not with my husband. Not with my choice. With them. Aaron stepped forward, his voice firm. "She's not going anywhere." Ethan's eyes flicked toward him for the first time, his lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, I see. The little fiancé finally grew a backbone." Aaron didn't flinch. Neither did I. Ethan turned back to me. "I'm not here to fight, Amelia, but you know what will happen if you don't come back." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What did he do?" I asked quietly. Ethan's smirk widened. I hated that look. That smug, I know something you don't look. "You should check your phone," he said. I swallowed hard, unlocking it. A new email sat in my inbox, from my company. I clicked on it, scanning the words quickly. Then, my stomach dropped. Terminated, effective immediately. No warning, no reason given, just one simple statement. Your employment has been terminated as of today. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands shook as I gripped the phone tighter. Ethan tilted his head. "Guess Dad made a few calls." Aaron took a sharp step forward. "You..." Ethan held up a hand, his smile never faltering. "Don't be dramatic. It's just a job." I stared at him. He didn't care. None of them did. I had worked for that company for years. I had built a career, earned my position, And my father had ripped it away with a single phone call. My fists clenched. This was just the beginning. If I didn't go back, they would take more. They would destroy everything. I lifted my chin. Tell Dad he can take my job, take my money, take everything. Ethan's smile faded slightly. But he will never take me back, I said firmly. Aaron stepped beside me, his presence solid, unwavering. We're leaving the city, he said. Ethan's eyes darkened. That's a mistake. I met his gaze. Maybe. I stepped back and shut the door in his face. A second later, the knocking started again. Harder this time, furious. But I didn't open it. I turned to Aaron. We need to leave. Now. Aaron nodded. Let's go. We grabbed our bags and slipped out the back door. As we walked into the night, I didn't look back. Because I knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning of war. We drove through the city in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a heavy stone. Aaron's fingers were tight around the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. We had planned to leave in the morning. We didn't have that luxury anymore. Not after what my father had done. I glanced at my phone again, rereading the email. Your employment has been terminated as of today. It felt surreal, like a dream I was waiting to wake up from. But I wasn't dreaming. This was real. They had ripped my life apart in one night, and I had no doubt they weren't done yet. Aaron's voice cut through the silence. Where do you want to go? I swallowed hard. You said you had a friend in Chicago? He nodded. Then let's go there, I said. Aaron didn't question it. He just pressed down on the gas, taking the nearest highway out of town. I stared out the window, my mind racing. I had nothing now. No job, no money, no home. My parents had made sure of that. But the worst part? I knew this was just the beginning. We drove through the night, stopping only for gas. Aaron tried to get me to sleep, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face, his smug smirk, the way he had enjoyed breaking the news to me. He had wanted to see me suffer. They all did. By sunrise, we were halfway to Chicago. Aaron reached for my hand, squeezing gently. We'll figure this out, Amelia. I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure. Could we really escape them? Could I ever be free? Then, my phone buzzed. I hesitated before picking it up. One new message, from a number I didn't recognize. But the moment I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. It was a photo of my apartment. The lights were off, the door slightly open. Below the image, one message. You shouldn't have left. A shiver ran down my spine. Aaron noticed my expression. What is it? I handed him the phone, my fingers trembling. He cursed under his breath. They were in your apartment? I swallowed hard. I think so. Aaron's grip tightened around the phone. This isn't just about control anymore, he said. They're trying to scare you. It was working. I had known my father would retaliate. But this was different. They weren't just taking things away. They were watching me, tracking me. Aaron took a deep breath. We'll be in Chicago soon. We'll figure something out. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. By the time we reached Chicago, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. Aaron's friend, Leo, lived in a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was safe. For now. Leo greeted us at the door, his expression tense. Aaron told me everything. You can stay here as long as you need. I murmured a quiet thank you as we stepped inside. Leo's place was cluttered but comfortable. A couch, a small kitchen, books stacked in every corner. Aaron dropped our bags near the door, then turned to me. We need to plan our next move. I nodded, running a hand through my hair. I don't know what to do. Aaron exchanged a glance with Leo. Then he sat down beside me, his voice gentle but firm. We fight back. I blinked at him. How? Aaron leaned forward. Your father controls everything in your life because he built everything in your life. The job, the money, the connections, they all came from him. I swallowed hard. It was true. Everything I had was because of my father. And now, he was taking it all away. Aaron's voice softened. But Amelia, that means he also has weaknesses. I frowned. What do you mean? Leo cut in. Your father's company, how much do you know about it? I hesitated. Not much, honestly. I had never been interested in his business. I had spent my life avoiding it, avoiding him. Aaron's eyes locked onto mine. What if we look into his business, his finances, his connections? I frowned. You think there's something shady? Aaron nodded. There's always something shady. Leo leaned back. Your father built an empire. Empires don't stay clean. A slow realization crept over me. If my father could destroy my life with a few phone calls, what could I do to his? I had never fought back before. I had always done what he wanted, even when I hated it, even when it broke me. But now he had taken everything. I met Aaron's gaze. Okay. His brows lifted. Okay? I took a deep breath. We find something on him. We find a way to destroy his empire. Leo grinned. Now we're talking. Aaron squeezed my hand. I wasn't sure what we would find, but I knew one thing. My father had declared war on me, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to fight back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of murmured voices. Aaron and Leo were already deep in conversation, their faces tense. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. What's going on? Aaron turned to me, his jaw tight. Leo found something. Leo gestured toward his laptop. I've been digging into your father's company. I pushed aside my blanket, moving closer. Leo's screen was filled with financial records, spreadsheets, and email screenshots. My stomach twisted. What did you find? Leo exhaled. Your father has been covering up some serious financial fraud. We're talking millions, maybe billions. My breath caught. Are you sure? Leo nodded. It's all here. Shell companies. False reports. Money being funneled through offshore accounts. If this information gets out. He didn't finish his sentence. He didn't have to. If this information got out, my father's empire would crumble. My heart pounded. Aaron studied me carefully. Amelia, this could be dangerous. I swallowed hard. I knew what he meant. My father wouldn't just let this slide. But I also knew something else. This was my chance. He had destroyed my life. Now I had the power to destroy his. I met Aaron's gaze. We do it. His expression darkened. Are you sure? I nodded. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The next few hours were a blur. Leo worked on gathering more evidence. Aaron made calls to trusted contacts. I sat in the corner, staring at the laptop screen, my mind spinning. I had never imagined this would be my life. Running, hiding, planning revenge. And yet, here I was. Leo suddenly cursed under his breath. Aaron and I turned to him. What? I asked. Leo's expression was grim. We have a problem. My stomach twisted. What kind of problem? Leo turned the laptop toward us. On the screen was a news article. A headline that sent a cold chill down my spine. Amelia Lancaster's fiancé caught in financial scandal. Ties to criminal activity? My vision blurred. I scanned the article, my heart hammering. They were framing Aaron. "They're trying to make it look like I'm involved in something illegal," Aaron muttered. Leo cursed. "Your father is smart. He's turning the narrative against you." I felt sick. They had already taken everything from me. Now they wanted to take Aaron too. Aaron clenched his fists. "We need to move faster." Leo nodded. "We need a way to release this information before your father can control the damage." I swallowed hard. "How?" Leo's eyes met mine. "We go public." It was risky, dangerous, but it was our only option. Leo started compiling everything into a full exposé. Emails, financial records, confidential reports. It was undeniable proof. And then we uploaded it to every major news outlet, to every social media platform. It spread like wildfire. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing. Calls, messages, emails, and then one name appeared on my screen. My father. I stared at it, my breath shallow. Aaron placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to answer." But I did. I pressed the button, bringing the phone to my ear. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, his voice low and controlled. "You've made a mistake, Amelia." My grip tightened. "No, you did." A pause. Then, "You think you've won?" I exhaled shakily. "I don't need to win. I just need to make sure you lose." A slow, chilling chuckle. "You have no idea what you've done." Then, the line went dead. I lowered the phone, my fingers trembling. Aaron's voice was gentle. "Are you okay?" I nodded. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. My father wouldn't go down without a fight. And I had just declared war. The storm had begun. The exposé had gone viral, and the internet was tearing my father apart. Major news outlets had picked up the story. Headlines flashed across my phone screen. "Billionaire caught in massive financial fraud." "Lancaster Empire under investigation. Possible criminal charges." "Secrets of a powerful family exposed." My hands trembled as I scrolled through the comments. People were furious. The world was finally seeing my father for what he truly was. Corrupt. Greedy. A man who destroyed everything in his path to maintain power. I should have felt victorious. But instead, a sick feeling curled in my stomach. Because I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. Aaron and Leo stayed glued to their laptops, tracking every update. "The government is getting involved," Leo muttered. "There's talk of a full-scale investigation." Aaron exhaled. "That's good, right?" Leo hesitated. "It should be. But your father isn't the kind of man to just sit back and let this happen." A shiver ran down my spine. Leo was right. My father didn't lose. He crushed his enemies before they even became a threat. And right now, I was enemy number one. Aaron's phone suddenly buzzed. He picked it up, his face darkening. I leaned forward. "Who is it?" He hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. My breath caught. It was a message from an unknown number. "You made your move. Now it's my turn." A lump formed in my throat. Aaron clenched his jaw. "This is a threat." Leo cursed under his breath. "You need to be ready. Your father is going to retaliate." I swallowed hard. "How?" Leo hesitated, but I already knew. He wouldn't just go after me. He would go after everyone I cared about, and he would make sure I watched as he destroyed them. The first hit came that evening. Aaron's bank accounts were frozen. His business shut down overnight. His name was plastered across the news, not as my supportive fiancé, but as a fraudster under criminal investigation. I watched in horror as the headlines flipped. Aaron Carter, accused of money laundering tied to Lancaster scandal. Fiancé of Amelia Lancaster under federal investigation. I turned to Aaron, my chest tightening. He's framing you. Aaron ran a hand through his hair, frustration flashing across his face. Of course he is. Leo's fingers flew across his keyboard. He's feeding false information to the authorities. They're actually launching an inquiry against Aaron. Panic clawed at my throat. We had exposed my father, and now he was burying Aaron alive. This is bad, Leo muttered. If we don't do something, they'll arrest him. I shook my head, my heart pounding. We won't let that happen. Aaron exhaled sharply. He's forcing you to make a choice, Amelia. I frowned. What choice? His eyes met mine. Either you surrender, or he destroys me. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. This was my father's game, a cruel, calculated move. He knew I loved Aaron. He knew I would do anything to protect him. And he was using that against me. A few hours later, my phone rang. I already knew who it was. I picked it up, my hands shaking. My father's voice was calm, amused. "You've had your fun," he said. I didn't respond. He sighed. "But now, it's time to end this little rebellion of yours." A cold chill ran down my spine. "You think you're untouchable?" he continued. "You think you've won?" I clenched my jaw. "You're afraid. That's why you're trying so hard to shut me down." He chuckled. "Amelia, you're still so naive." Then his voice dropped, turning cold. "I don't lose." A lump formed in my throat. "I gave you everything," he continued. "And now? I'll take everything back." I forced myself to breathe. "You already have. What more could you possibly take?" A long pause. Then, "Your mother." My entire body went still. My mother, the woman who had always stayed silent, who had always followed his rules. I had barely spoken to her since this war began. And now, my father was using her against me. "She's still my wife," he said smoothly. "Do you think I don't know where she is? Who she talks to?" My throat tightened. "Leave her out of this." He laughed. "Oh, Amelia, that's not how this works." A cold sweat broke across my skin. I had thought I was ready for his retaliation, but I hadn't been prepared for this. "You have two choices," he said. His voice was calm, controlled, like he already knew how this would end. "Come home." My stomach twisted. "Come home," he repeated. "Admit you made a mistake. Apologize, and I'll fix everything." I swallowed hard. "And if I don't?" Silence. Then say goodbye to your mother." A sharp, strangled sound escaped my throat. "Think carefully, Amelia," he murmured. "You have 24 hours. Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. My father had taken everything, my home, my job, my reputation, and now he was coming for my mother. I turned to Aaron and Leo, my vision blurred with tears. "He's using her," I whispered. "If I don't go back, he'll hurt her." Aaron's expression darkened. "You can't go back." "But if I don't," Leo cut in, "if you go back, he'll destroy you." Tears burned in my eyes. I didn't know what to do. I had started this war to free myself, to finally break away. But now, my father had found my weakest point, and I only had 24 hours to decide. I had 24 hours to decide. To walk away and leave my mother behind, or to surrender everything I had fought for. The weight of it crushed me. Aaron and Leo watched me closely. "You can't go back," Aaron said firmly. Leo nodded. "It's a trap. If you walk into that house, you won't walk back out." I knew they were right. But my mother, I had never truly fought for her. I had spent years resenting her silence, her compliance. But what if she had been just as trapped as I was? What if, after everything, she still deserved to be saved? I exhaled shakily. "I'm going," I said. Aaron tensed. "Amelia." I turned to him, my voice stronger this time. "I'm not going back to surrender. I'm going back to finish this." Aaron studied me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Leo sighed. "All right, but we're not letting you go alone." The plan was reckless, dangerous, but it was our only chance. Leo had spent the entire night hacking into my father's security system. "We need evidence," he muttered, typing furiously. "Real-time, undeniable proof of what he's doing." Aaron leaned over. "Can you access their surveillance?" Leo smirked. "Already done." On the screen, live security feeds flickered. I swallowed hard. There it was, my father's estate, every hallway, every room, and then a small, dimly lit space. My stomach clenched. My mother. She sat alone, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. I exhaled shakily. "She's okay," I whispered. "For now. But we had one shot at this, and if we failed, none of us were making it out." I arrived at the estate the next evening. The gates opened without hesitation. My father was expecting me. As I walked inside, my heart pounded. The house felt colder, darker, like it knew I was no longer a part of it. The butler led me to the grand dining room, and there he was, sitting at the head of the table, my father. He smiled. "You made the right choice." I didn't speak. I just pulled out a chair and sat across from him. He studied me carefully. "You look different." I held his gaze. "You don't." His smile faltered. I wasn't the weak, obedient daughter anymore, and he knew it. He poured himself a drink. "Tell me, Amelia, what was the point of all this?" He swirled the liquid in his glass. "You ran. You fought. You exposed me. And yet, here you are." I exhaled. "I came for my mother." He smirked. "Did you?" He leaned back, amused. "Or did you come to beg?" My hands curled into fists. He still thought he had control. He still thought I was the scared little girl who would always bow to him. I forced my voice to stay calm. "You're losing." His smirk faded. I leaned forward. "You think you can twist the media, frame Aaron, freeze our accounts." I tilted my head. "But what happens when the government comes knocking?" His jaw tightened. He knew the investigations were real. He knew prison was a real possibility. "You think you're so clever," he muttered. I smiled. "Number, I think I'm smarter than you." A sound echoed from the hall. Footsteps. My breath hitched. Then, my mother entered. She paused, her eyes flickering between us. I stood. "Mom?" My father raised a hand. "Sit." I froze. His voice was low, dangerous. "You don't give orders in my house." My mother swallowed hard. She looked thinner, tired, like the years of silence had drained the life out of her. "Mom?" I whispered. "Come with me." Her eyes darted to my father. Fear. She was still afraid of him, even now. "Mom?" I tried again. His voice cut through the air. "She's not leaving." I turned to him, my chest tightening. "Yes, she is." My father's expression darkened. "Enough," he snapped. "You're done pretending you have power here." I held his gaze. "You're wrong." Then I pressed a button on my phone. His face paled, because in that moment, his voice boomed through the house, the security system speakers, the hidden microphones Leo had hacked. His own words echoed in every room. "You have two choices. Come home, or say goodbye to your mother." A direct threat, a confession. Lev. Broadcasted. My father's own house had just turned against him. His eyes widened in horror. "You little—" I smiled. This isn't your house anymore. The next few minutes were chaos. The doors burst open, agents, reporters, cameras flashing. Everything Leo had set up had worked perfectly. The world was hearing the real truth now. My father wasn't untouchable, and for the first time in his life, he was afraid. He turned to my mother. "Tell them the truth," he hissed, his last attempt at control. But my mother, she did something I never expected. She stepped forward, lifted her chin, and said the words I had been waiting to hear my whole life. "He's lying." Silence. Then, the moment shattered. The authorities pulled my father away. His protests drowned beneath the cameras, the shouting. And just like that, it was over. The next morning, I stood outside the house. Aaron slipped his hand into mine. Leo leaned against the car, smirking. "Told you it would work?" I exhaled. The war was over. I had won. My mother stood beside me, her hands trembling. She had never known freedom. But now, she had a choice. She turned to me. "What do we do now?" I smiled. "Whatever we want."